All right, thank you everyone for coming to the Cyborg Theocracy event. Before I dive into it, we just have some club announcements. All right, so on August 3rd, these are some upcoming events. We have the Small Business Crash with Brandon Castro. So make that room for that on your calendar. That's coming up on Saturday, right? Yep. And August 4th, voter registration drive in Queens, which is also my birthday. So happy birthday to me. Yeah, you can. Yeah. Jude, turn off the TV. Thank you. And then August 8th is Candidate Social with Michael Goldstein on healthcare policy. August 10th, Trump phone banking social. Definitely, if you have a few hours, we're doing phone banking for the Trump campaign in calling swing state voters. So you don't want to miss that if you can make it. August 25th, maybe the coolest thing. Well, there's a lot of great stuff on here. The Paintball Wars with the Veterans Caucus. So we'll be teaming up veterans versus, noobs. And I'm sure that it's going to be very one-sided, but definitely come. It'll be a lot of fun. On September, and that was August 25th. September 29th, we have the Tunnels to Tower 5K run/walk. So if you're not up to running, you can walk it. If you don't even want to walk, you can still buy the ticket and go to the spaghetti dinner afterwards. And then December 15th, the event of the year, our gala, which is the MAGA Republican event of every year, and you don't want to miss it. All right, so now let me announce that we are officially starting the Cyborg Theocracy event. Thank you so much for coming. I organized this event because I want to know more about what our future faces, this transhumanist future that is promised by the World Economic Forum. We know who they are. We hear a lot about AI changing the future. What does that mean for the future of our moral systems? How could Christianity change, or how can we digest what AI might bring through a Christian perspective? How might our moral structure change? They promise things like everlasting life. Is that even possible? Can you really upload your mind to the Borg? Maybe some of these promises, likely like the story of Icarus, will fall short. We'll see. I'll leave our experts to do more of the talking. So first we have Joe Allen. He's going to talk about his work. He is the author of Dark Aeon. He is a frequent guest on the War Room podcast, and he is also has the podcast Omega Dot. Omega Point. The Omega Point podcast. Definitely check it out. So that's our first speaker. And then our next speaker is David Engelhardt. He's the pastor of Kings Church in New York City. He is an attorney. And he is also one of the head honchos at Lucid Media, which is a news platform, media platform through a Christian perspective. And he's also on the board of TPUSA. So we got a lot of great, powerful players here, great minds, and let's hear what they have to say. And also, before I finish, we have their books right here. And I did say on the invite, the first 20 people to register would get a free copy of Good Kills. So I will check the list and make sure you get your copy of the book. So thank you so much for coming, and let's welcome Joe Allen.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome. It's wonderful to be here. Very classy, very swanky. Ian, I'm impressed. I figured it would be some kind of crazy punk rock dive, but that's not where we're at. So the topic, cyborg theocracy, is probably best to begin with definitions, right? So what is a cyborg? A cyborg oftentimes is thought of as maybe a human being with a bionic eye, maybe biomechanical limbs, but it's actually much broader than that. A cyborg is simply a cybernetic organism. It's the fusion, either direct or indirect, of a biological organism and a machine. So the world is full of cyborgs now. In fact, our entire society is cybernetic. Our entire society is a cyborg civilization. It's the early phases It's hard to tell really how fast it will move. It's moving very fast as I speak. So we went from televisions out here to laptops here to smartphones here to virtual reality, probably in the near future if they can get the kinks worked out. And if men like Elon Musk or Peter Thiel have their way, perhaps the screen will be unnecessary because the information can be put directly into your mind. At the moment, these are dreams, half realized, partially realized, but these are the dreams of the wealthiest men on the planet. These are dreams facilitated by the most powerful governments and corporations on the planet. And there's a serious religious element to this. So that's the theocracy part. And what's a theocracy? I mean, by definition, a theocracy would be a society ruled by gods. But that's not exactly how things like that work out, right? If you look at Christendom, if you look at the ancient kingdoms of Judea, the northern kingdom, if you look at Egypt, so on and so forth, any theocracy is not necessarily directly ruled by gods, but by priests. Now, who are the priests in a cyborg theocracy? The priest is the one who can interpret what the machine is doing, what the machine is saying, the information coming from the machine. The priest is the one who determines the parameters, the uses, the direction of the machine. And of course, to the extent that the machine is running the society, the priest is ruling by way of digital gods. Think of it this way. Think of, if you can remember as far back as 15 years ago, think of what life was like before behaviors were so tightly linked to algorithms. Before the phone was the first thing you turned to for answers to simple questions, why am I sick? Simple questions, where am I going? Simple questions, where can I buy this? But also the heaviest of questions. What does the Bible say about this? Does God love me? Will the machine save me? I don't know if you've ever Googled it. My search has that on it. But in a cyborg theocracy, and that is absolutely where we are going, the society is suffused with digital systems that manipulate behavior, that monitor people's thoughts, monitor their spending, monitor who their social networks are connected to. And it's a society that is moving towards what these people believe is a metamorphosis. So that human beings, as biological organisms, as I believe temples to a spirit, are no longer to turn inward to the spirit or upward to divinity. In a cyborg theocracy, all that is transcendent is right here on earth, but it's virtual, it's data, and it's the proper interpretation of data. Now, when people come to hear me speak about technology, transhumanism, posthumanism, the cyborg theocracy, I think that by and large they want me to tell them that there are evil villains who want to erect artificial intelligence gods, who want to force chips into your brain to control you, who want to inject you with various concoctions to change your DNA to specifications. And that's true in a mythical sense. But unfortunately, that kind of binary reality really lingers in the realm of myth. And in the same way that people want me to tell them that there is an evil villain, the Klaus Schwab, the Yuval Harari, whoever, that wants to do all these things to you, they want me to tell them at the end of the talk that everything is going to be okay. I don't believe in cartoon villains, and I don't believe everything is going to be okay, depending on your taste. If you enjoy a cyborg existence, it's going to be great. if you want to resist, it's going to be very, very difficult going forward. The reality is that the evil boogeymen are as much on our side as on the other. So I'm old enough to remember when the World Economic Forum was the premier venue in which the discussion of algocracy, rule by algorithm, in which the discussion of genetic engineering for the purposes of health and human enhancement, where the discussion of brain-computer interfaces to bring human beings into a tighter bond with artificial intelligence, the World Economic Forum was the boogeyman we were all to look at and say, these are the evil people. These are the godless heathens that want to turn us into some sort of globalist Borg. The problem with that narrative is that the most powerful companies working on these technologies, yes, most are associated with the World Economic Forum, but it's so common for a corporation or a government to be associated with the World Economic Forum, it's almost like saying that they graduated from college. No, the most influential, especially as far as public narrative goes, especially as far as changing the narrative as to who we are, where we came from, and where we are going, these are people like Elon Musk. These are people in a more esoteric sense like Peter Thiel. These are people, you'll get to know his name I think pretty well in the near future if you don't know it already, like Mark Andreessen. And these are people who are courting the right, who have Trump's ear, who want a cyborg theocracy as much, if not more, as anyone in the sort of globalist boogeyman milieu. And so as we move forward, as we move into an era in which technology increasingly takes the place of what once was transcendent divinity, as we move forward into an era in which increasingly authority is not in the human being, think for a moment of your last Uber driver and how well he knew the streets versus how he followed the algorithm to where he was going. Increasingly, that will move up and up and up the social scale. We're already moving into an era, for instance, in which tech workers are expected to utilize artificial intelligence in order to increase their output, whether they be coders, whether they be hardware designers. The same goes for doctors. The same goes in the military. And probably the most concerning to me, because this is what the future of the society will become in education. The idea that an artificial intelligence can be not just a companion for a human instructor, a human model, the sole transmitter of culture up until this point of history, but the artificial intelligence in this way of thinking is perhaps superior. And the artificial intelligence will free homeschoolers from the bonds of a state-controlled school system, but will then place the children in the hands of soulless machines. And I don't know how many people will accept this. In America, it's a matter of what one's boundary is between the sacred and profane. In America, it's a matter of choice. But just as with a vehicle, or a phone, or even your clothing, and certainly with the kinds of things that one must have in order to succeed in a government job or a high-level corporate job, you'll have the choice, but the choice will be to either ascend in status or descend in status. Because the new status symbols are absolutely technological and have been for all of our lives. And that's going to continue on and on and on, upward and upward, or in my view, from a spiritual perspective, downward and downward and downward. Now, I'm not trying to pick on Elon Musk or Peter Thiel. And I'm certainly not trying to put Trump on blast in a place like this, get your ass kicked doing something like that, right? In general, what we're looking at is this is a sort of gray flood of technological advancement. And everyone is trying to swim, and everyone who has the power is trying to steer. And so it doesn't matter if it's right wing or left wing. It doesn't matter if it's globalist or nationalist. And increasingly, as I look at people like Andrew Torba at Gab and various evangelical churches, and even the Vatican, who had their very first conference after COVID in person was on artificial intelligence. Every institution in our society is swimming in this gray ooze. And in some places it's going to be rainbow colored, in some places it's going to be red, white, and blue. But beneath it all is that gray, soulless mimicry of intelligence, that strange, almost anti-Platonic reflection of the human being. And these are to be our companions going forward. This is a new race, as they oftentimes say. And my argument is very, very simple. To the extent that artificial minds and whatever bodies they inhabit are to become companions, and that includes the television, and honestly, I could have even done without the microphone. You should view it with a suspicious eye. You should be racist against robots. And to the extent that these technologies are in fact standing in the place of transcendent divinity, which they do, what do you turn to transcendent divinity for? For wisdom, for knowledge, for healing, or on occasion, for justification to kill. As artificial intelligence moves more and more up that ladder of status, it occupies all the places that traditional divine inspiration, divine connection once held. And so, to the extent that these machines are being placed as a sort of screen in front of Christ, as with the original Greek anti, what we're looking at, and I don't mean to sound like a Southern Baptist, what we're looking at is the rise of a mechanical anti-Christ, that being in place of Christ. And that being may have a Christ face, as the guys at Gab want to do, as many churches are working on now, Jesus apps all over the place. But behind that smiley Jesus face is a multi-tentacled Shoggoth, a sort of digital Cthulhu. And as that being, that alien life form, monitors you, attempts to manipulate you, and ultimately acting with the goal of sending you through a kind of metamorphosis and your children and your children's children into a new kind of human being, I counsel you to be very suspicious at the least and openly hostile, if you've got it in you, to this bizarre machine emerging out of Silicon Valley with the assistance of our government and military, emerging out of the same sorts of counterpart labs in Europe, in Israel, in India, in China. As we move forward, the way I see it is this way. I don't think that the near future belongs to traditional Western Christendom. I think the near future belongs to those who worship the machines. And if I'm correct, even if they're worshiping machines with Jesus faces, if I'm correct, then what we're looking at as far as the position of those who want to resist, who want to swim against this flow, is going to look more like the Hebrews under Babylon or under Egypt. It's going to look more like the Christians under the Roman Empire. It's going to look more like the Gnostics under Catholicism. And I fear that it will look a lot more like natives running naked from European colonizers who have superior firepower and greater knowledge and greater command of the physical world. So, in conclusion, as you face this mechanical antichrist, I encourage you to face it with a touch of humor, if you can, because it could be worse. We could be taken on board alien spacecraft, probed and mutated. Instead, they just call it the hospital. So thank you very much. I appreciate your attention. God bless, and God save our souls.
Thank you, Joe. Great job, man. Thank you, Ian, man behind the camera. Happy birthday. How old are you? 22?
Yeah, right. 32.
32. Come on. Let's give it up for Ian. Thank you, Ian, for putting this on. Thank you guys for being here. My name is David Engelhardt. I am a pastor here. Our church is right now on 31st and 450 31st. So if you want to come and be offended any Sunday, you're welcome to come on out. So I'm a pastor and a lawyer, and it's always funny because like whenever I tell somebody that outside of my normal world, they always freak out because we've been so inundated with this separation of church and state thing. It's like even when I just say pastor, lawyer, people are like, how dare you? Because the church has so often backed away because of that kind of cultural ubiquitous thought that is leading, in our churches, evangelical churches, and our Catholic churches, and our Orthodox churches that we're not allowed to. But Jeremiah 29 says to seek the peace of the city, because if you seek it and it prospers, then you yourself will prosper. So my position is that we actually have a theological obligation to pursue the peace of our city. What does that mean? That means great tax law, and that means putting bad guys in jail, and that means actually punishing evildoers. And those are really basic, fundamental things. And we're not afraid to talk about it, and it frustrates people, but it's what it is. I mean, can it get worse? Yes, it can. Joe just said we might get probed, so it can get worse. I want to talk, just because I'm a pastor, I want to talk from this topic just kind of out of the scripture. Start with this idea of cyborg theocracy in the sense that I think theocracies always exist. I think this Christian nationalism thing is nonsense. Every law that's on the books has moral presumptions. There are moral axioms that come from a moral framework that substantiate all of your moral policies, right? So we don't drive 25 miles an hour in a neighborhood where there are little kids because we don't want to kill little kids. That's a moral presumption based on a moral worldview that comes from certain axioms. Whether it's like, I'm just a utilitarian and I think people should live a long time, I think that's a good presumption to work through. But all of those presumptions are moral, and right now in society we have secular humanism that basically says, just like Joe is saying, I am the center of the universe. I make all the decisions. I am the top step in divinity. It doesn't get higher than me. And from that place, then moral presumptions are then made, and then our laws are made. So the idea that there's not a theocracy and there's Christian nationalism trying to encroach on some kind of neutral space is just fundamentally untrue. We're always moving on a spectrum from one worldview to another, whether that's Christendom and those mores to secularism and atheism and those mores, which are basically, I can tell you what to do and I can eat 10 million people because I'm doing what's best for humanity, because I'm ultimately the determiner of morality. So I think there is always a theocratic battle happening at all times, whether or not you are willing to make that determination. And there's either someone that's God that makes an external determination on the moral construct, or I am the God. And if you hear agnostics or atheists try to have this conversation, you just say, but why? Like, don't kill a baby, but why? I've been killing babies since the history of mankind. Since literally written history, we've been throwing babies to Baal and having them lit on fire. And why? Because cultures that worship sexuality, like our culture, have to do something with the production of that offspring. Because sex, functionally, creates life. So we do what we want generally, and then we build moral systems based upon doing what we want. And so what does AI do? I love this idea of the wheel as the fundamental icon of what technology is. It speeds things up. it speeds up our desires, right? And if you think about, all technological advancements, there is a way to shoehorn them into me getting what I want faster. And we see that absolutely in AI and our computer systems and all this kind of stuff. It's like, I can find out, I actually told Joe that I was gonna read his book, and then I just decided I'll ask ChatGPT about it, which I did, and it answered. And it said good things, believe it or not. It doesn't hate Joe. Maybe it's secretly plotting against him, but it speeds up the stuff that I want. And therefore, it can speed up a morally decadent culture quicker to the place of decline, and then quicker to abandoning, let's say, godly moral principles and saying, I can do whatever I want. It's relativity. And that's why we see atheistic regimes in the 19th century killing more people than any other regime in the history of mankind, because the morality is totally relative. So let me jump here into this scripture that I think is very appropriate. It's Romans chapter 1. If you haven't read it before, I highly encourage it. It's the best-selling book of all time, et cetera, et cetera. Romans, the Bible, you know what I'm saying. It says this, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all unrighteousness and unrighteous men who hold the truth in unrighteousness, who hold the truth. So they have the truth about how the world should function, about what we should do, about how policy decisions. They have the truth, but they hold it in unrighteousness. What does that mean? And actually, the best definition, if you go to the literal translation, they suppress the truth in unrighteousness. I think the greatest danger of our current AI systems, maybe not the danger in the future, but the greatest practical danger is the suppression of truth in unrighteousness. Did we not all experience that in 2020? And did we not all experience that with the election fraud? And did we not all experience that with a million things? Did you guys just see on Twitter the other day, you search for Donald Trump on Google, and then it just blasts you with Kamala? That's literally the suppression of truth in unrighteousness. And this is what it says. It says, like, the wrath of God is revealed against mankind when they suppress the truth in unrighteousness. They start to break the world. You start to break the world when you hide truth and when you manipulate truth. Because my proposition is that God's in charge. He lets us run the show for a while, and then he steps in and he's like, yeah, I'm done with you guys. You know what I mean? I don't like anybody see Apocalypto? The kind and loving Central Americans that were ripping people's hearts out by the thousands every day, and like the evil colonial people that came to. This is what Martin Luther said in the 1500s about the Arabs, the Muslims that were whooping on the Christians. He said that the Arabs. This is Martin Luther, right? Protestant Reformation. He said they were the scourge of God, that they were punishing the wickedness of the Christians at the time. And so that is the sovereignty of God over the affairs of men. Because, whether it's Babel or Egypt or us right now, when we try to ascend, the systems of our ascension are always very fragile. And they don't feel fragile, but the systems of our ascension are fragile. They're powerful, and then I'll tell you that in a second. Okay, because that which may be known from God is manifest, for God showed it to people. The invisible things of God, this is referring to the moral laws, the moral principles, moral axioms, from the beginning of the world have been known to man. Because when they knew God, this is the people that withheld it. Excuse me. Because when they knew God, they didn't glorify him, and they weren't thankful, but became vain in their imaginations. They were and foolish in their minds. Can I steal this thing? Is this okay?
Yeah.
This is appropriate preacher pulpit. I can bang it. They became foolish in their minds, professing themselves to be wise. They became fools. And this is the trick of technology. It makes you profess yourself to be wise. And you hear it in conversation, you see it practically. It's like, we have cell phones. Those people in the 1700s that wrote that stupid old document, what a bunch of idiots. That one guy had wood teeth, what a moron. Wood teeth. And there is an arrogance that is inherent to technological advancement. With our pride, we become foolish. Morally foolish. There's a famous scripture, the fool in his heart says there is no God. That's not about intelligence quotient. That's not about speed of processing or the amount of memory that you can store with complex ideas. That's about moral foolishness, moral blindness. Professing themselves to become wise, they become fools. And then it says they changed the glory of the incorruptible God into the images made of man, birds, fourfold beasts, and creeping things. This is the idea of creating. They made this image, which is this moral ideal of perfection that's given to God by God. We can best see it applied in the Ten Commandments. They took this ideal and they said, you know what, we're going to behave like the beasts instead. And they start creating things, and then they start worshiping the things they create, which is exactly what cyborg theocracy is. People beginning to worship the thing they created. And this is the whole story of Romans 1. God says, I'm going to smash you because instead of worshiping me, you're worshiping the created thing because it has flashing lights, or it's shiny, or it gives you that information faster. So you feel this sense of self-empowerment because my needs get met faster. And God has a bad feeling about that. This is another verse about those idols. Their idols are silver and gold, the work of man's hands. So we're talking about the most valuable things in a society. For us, it's silicon chips, right? It's the amalgamation of our best technologies. It says these idols are made of silver and gold. They have mouths, but they cannot speak because they're just replicating. They have ears, but they cannot hear. They cannot see. They have hands, but they cannot handle, feet that cannot walk, neither a throat that they can speak. But man still, this is part of Psalms, still worships this created thing. Because man wants to do whatever he wants. That is ultimately what the story is. So, and then it says, wherefore God gave them up to their uncleanness. So they reject God, they reject his moral order. This is basically the book of Romans. Apostle Paul writes to this group of Roman citizens who are trying to figure out how to do Christianity in Roman culture with this Jewish background and Jewish believers in the community and Roman believers in the community. And he's trying to synchronize how the world fundamentally works from a Christian theological perspective for these people. How much time do I have? I feel like I'm going long. I thought I was going to have like 2 minutes here. Look at me preaching. Look at me going. And so this is what they did. They just decided to do whatever they wanted. And with their idols of the time, now our idols are synthetic, right? Of the time, they chase their own lusts. They dishonor their own bodies. They change the truth of God into a lie, and they worship and serve the creature, the created thing, rather than the creator. This is exactly, who are the most powerful people in our culture is the Silicon Valley kings right now, the princes of our time. Those are the people that are worshipped. Rather than the creator who's to be blessed forever, amen. For this cause God gave them over to their vile affections. He's like, if you want to worship created things, go for it. Do whatever you want. And then it says, and so this is what they do in their worship. They start going after their lusts. Their women did not change the natural use for which is against nature. Likewise, the men, leaving their natural use for women, burned in their lust toward one another. Men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving themselves the recompense of their error, which God will meet. And it says this, even that they did not know or retain the knowledge of God in their heart, God gave them over to those things that were in their heart. It's literally what's happened with us right now. Like, a third of all the internet searches, this is 2019, TechCrunch said, a third of all of the internet searches with all of our knowledge and our Wikipedia are for porn. I mean, that's what they are, to see buttholes and boobs. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's how sophisticated we are. That we've taken all of this power and we just pursue our own lusts with it. And it starts to corrupt the whole system. And chaos ensues. And then when chaos ensues, the beast gets stronger and stronger. And then really, like Joe said, you're in trouble when the beast gets stronger. So I want to read you this very obscure scripture as I start to land the plane here. This is Revelation 13. This is one of the most bizarre passages of the New Testament. This is what people say. They say it's the number one book that people want to hear about in the church, and the number one book that pastors don't want to preach about because it's so confusing. But look at this. It says, and I stood up upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Upon his horns 10 crowns. Upon his heads the names of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard. feet like a bear, mouth like a lion. And the dragon gave him power and great authority. And so, classically, in Hebrew literature, the sea is a place of chaos and disaster. And the Hebrews didn't love the sea. Actually, in the New Testament literary tradition, it says there is no sea because it's representing a place of peace. The sea was like, you go out on the sea and you never know if a storm's going to come and you're going to die, or a sea creature is going to eat you. It is arbitrary and chaotic. And so what happens is this giant, crazy beast comes rising out of the sea. It's like, what is that? So in Revelation, the beast represents the full strength of mankind, the power of man, really the governments of man. That's the crowns and the thorns. That represents the authority of man. And it rises up out of the sea, and then it starts to dominate and attack the people of God, all this kind of stuff. So think of this. You have a sea, which represents chaos, and you have a beast rising out of it. The picture is very, very simple. Every time in the political history of man where man is not holding fast to eternal principles, the beast grows in power in times of chaos. Do you remember 2020? Actually, do you remember 2001, September 11th? I remember going to the airport with visit my grandparents in 97, walking up to the gate. Then chaos happens and we get an entire new branch of government. Every time there is chaos, the beast grows in power. So we have, whatever COVID thing was the COVID thing, right? And then the beast just magnifies in power and strength. And the picture in the scripture is that when the beast grows in power, the people that are righteous get diminished and the power structure grows, because people are like, just like with the synthesis of knowledge inside of mechanized systems, human beings say, I'm going to trust the biggest thing around me, the biggest group of people. I'm going to give them all my trust. And then so the beast grows and grows and grows. And then it says in Revelation 13, the saints, all they can do now is just endure because the beast is so huge. And now we have a beast that's married to a secular humanist theocracy, synthesized with a technological structure that's incredibly powerful. And what happens in the story? The story says the good guys just have to endure until that system collapses. Now, last point. There is a principle of physics as related to material products. Let's take this podium, for instance. If this podium was 1,000 times bigger, the atomic substructure of the podium itself would not be able to hold up its own weight. It's not designed to do that. It will crash under the weight of itself. Because the systems in our world actually aren't made to eternally get larger. That's the story of Tower of Babel. I will ascend, we will build our way to the heavens, and man has amnesia and thinks over and over again, I'm going to be able to do that. And the higher they get, the more precarious their position gets. What does that mean for us? That means we have systems that are getting more and more powerful, but also there's a precarious substructure that they land upon. An EMP makes a lot of this stuff go away pretty quickly, and then we have a serious problem. So what does that mean for us? What's the challenge? I think the challenge is to be married to a higher law, because I think the systems of man, even though they're dangerous and scary and terrifying, they're temporal systems. And God presents through the Bible an eternal system that doesn't just end right now when the system breaks. Will the system break? I think it'll break, and I think it'll be regional. I don't know, 20 years from now? I don't know. It's just a guess based upon history, based upon the histories of systems and technology. But I could be wrong. It could be 100 years. What matters for us? What matters for us is that we marry ourselves to an eternal system, a system that doesn't break, a system that was created by God, the being that formed the heavens and the earth. That's it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. All right, we're going to have a question and answer session. So help me get these two chairs over here. We have our speakers sit here. We'll have a Q&A. while we get that set up, feel free to grab a drink, ponder what you just heard, and formulate your question. Yeah. I get you. Test. All right. 1, 2. Yes, here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Testing. Okay. All right. Here you go, sir. Thank you. All right. This will be a floating microphone. You want to float around? Yeah, sure. All right. Bring it. Thanks.
First question. Give me a hand. All right. Back.
No, I don't need it. David,
Yes.
you mentioned an EMP.
Yeah.
What is that?
An electromagnetic pulse.
Oh, okay.
So I mean that's part of what's interesting about technology is amoral, yeah, and it's amoral, which means once it's in the hand of the user, it's imbued with morality as an extension of the user itself. But our users, or our controllers, if you will, are all people that are secular humanists. They don't believe in any fixed moral system other than what's immediately convenient at the time. So the atomic bomb, for instance. I don't know who saw Oppenheimer. I fell asleep both times I tried to watch it. And, it's the vibe that I got from Hollywood was like, the atomic bomb is so evil. And I'm like, if you know the history, it's actually in the intro of my book. If you know the history of the atomic bombs, the Japanese were ramping up on killing American citizens day by day. And we were looking at losing like 5 or 6 times the amount of lives on the good guys' side, because remember, we didn't do anything. They just bombed Pearl Harbor on their own accord. Then we drop the atomic bomb, and it does something really good. And so morale, the tools of technology can be used in wonderful ways. But as they continue to grow and suck power, the bigger they get, the more fragile they get. Taking the atomic bomb as my example here. If you have a really, really big atomic bomb, we all die, right? It's like, take the atomic bomb, make it 1,000 times bigger, now we're dead. Now the whole planet is dead. And so there's a fragility in the ascension of technology, and I think you see that in Babel, I think you see that in Egypt, I think you see that, in the lives of, people getting Botox, the faces of people getting Botox. Sorry.
Heterosexual transgenderism.
Right, exactly. Is that I was meandering. Is that okay?
I'm a big advocate of the EMP. I just hope I'm not flying.
Joe, use the microphone because I'm
Check.
recording off the thing. Yeah, thanks.
I'm a big advocate of the EMP as long as I'm not flying. There was recently an electromagnetic pulse that came out from the sun, caused some solar flares, whatnot. But the idea that drove a lot of the paranoia is that, much like in the late 1800s, a real severe solar flare would knock out some or most, maybe all of the technological or the digital infrastructure that we depend on right now. And a well-placed nuclear bomb above any critical infrastructure would basically accomplish the same. Not a big advocate for... I'm being facetious when I say I'm a big fan of the EMP, only half joking. But I do think, though, that it's an indication that, as David was saying, these systems are very fragile. And the CrowdStrike failure is a really good indication of what happens. There are a lot of other theories around CrowdStrike. I find none of them very persuasive. But one way or the other, even if it was nefarious, what we can definitely see is that when everyone is dependent on one corporation for most of their services, then if that corporation flubs, or if they're infiltrated by nefarious actors, or whatever, then the possibility for disaster is much, much greater. So to the extent we have to live in a cyborg theocracy, I think that as much as possible to decentralize these systems and put the power in as many hands as possible. I'm a big fan of crypto, even if it's maybe part of that same beast.
Just farther away.
Farther away?
Yeah.
Is this good?
I can hear you.
Yell?
Yeah, no, that's good. Just talk normal.
Lift up
I'll
voices.
repeat your question.
Yeah.
Okay, it's kind of a long question. This is targeted towards David, but gentlemen can both answer. So I read this book. It was about Christianity and technology, and it was positing this idea that basically, in the same way that the heaven that's described in the Bible is not creating a completely new earth, that God will use the existing earth. It was positing the idea that existing technologies may actually be used in heaven, that it's not going to be radically different from some of the technologies that we may use today. And this was an idea, I don't remember the name of the book, so maybe it wasn't that profound, but if you think about, you were quoting Revelation, and it talks about scrolls, like paper scrolls, those are man-made technologies. So I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on potentially technologies in a broad sense being part of a heavenly existence?
I think that's a great question. I think let's look at this. Let's say all natural systems are biological technologies in the sense that they are designed organic systems. Human beings are carbon-based designed organic systems, incredibly complex, down to our very atoms that build upon our cells, blah, da, 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 right? They are technologies in the sense they're designed projects or entities created to do some kind of, end goal or good. And for humans, we believe Westminster Catechism, which is to glorify God and enjoy Him always. So to some degree, humans themselves are biological technologies created to glorify God and enjoy Him always and join in this eternal adventure. Yes, I think like we see all kinds of symbolism that was alive in approximately 80-70 when John wrote Revelation scrolls and whatever else there was to describe these things that he saw. And I think they have, as you've heard me say before in the past, a ton of different applications that reveal God's truth and beauty. I think the initial intent of God, if I read the scripture right, was to walk with Adam in the cool of the garden for eternity. And so we see, again, designed biological systems that are, you can call it technological because they're harder than they are softer, but these designed biological systems, chemical systems, are made for man's enjoyment and pleasure with one another and with God. So I don't see, us with iPads in heaven, but I certainly see all of the kind of biological infrastructure being not only at play, but heightened. For instance, talking to animals, right? Will we have some kind of neural link to talk to your cat? I don't know. But the idea that Eve wasn't surprised at the snake that was talking to her gives us some kind of indication that communication with animals, at least it's been posited, was possible. So the technologies that seem really fun to us in these small distilled versions, I think will be way more beautiful and extravagant and adventurous and amazing in the initial biological designs that will be eternal in context. Is that an okay answer? Thank you.
If maybe I have a bit of a different take, maybe not, I don't know. I do wonder if there'll be Christ GPT in heaven. You won't even have to bother him. You'll just look at your phone. So there are a lot of ways to interpret the Bible. I came from a tradition that interpreted it literally. I reject that almost entirely, especially books like Revelation. Unless you believe Jesus is in fact a seven-horned ram, there has to be room for metaphor, for symbolism. And the book of Revelation, chapter 13, is probably the most troubling because it is on one level very mysterious, and on the other it's very obvious what's being talked about with the first beast and the second beast. And the first beast has the power to draw down fire from heaven in front of everyone. Not unlike Truman. Not unlike the next one to pull the trigger on nuclear warheads. Or any other type of fire, missiles, what have you. Then there's the element just after that, just before, in which the second beast makes an image of the first, and the image speaks, and people are caused to worship that image. Of course, the imagery shows up a lot in the Bible, typically in the form of statues and idols. And so the idea of having an idol that didn't necessarily have to have a priest there to speak for it, but that we already have and will have increasingly sophisticated idols, pagan gods that can speak on their own. As Mark Andreessen wrote, they are making sand think. They're causing silicon to speak. And so that image of the beast is very, very powerful. The image of the beast that speaks, and all are compelled to worship it, to see it as the highest authority. And then, last but not least, and the most commonly known and talked about, and I think the most disturbing, is the mark of the beast. Because at that point, you have a one-world theocracy in which the chain of authority goes from the second to the first beast to the dragon, which of course is Satan. So sort of a satanic theocracy. And under that theocracy, alongside having idols that speak, every person is given a number. And I don't see it as being taken literally necessarily, but it's not all that figurative either. In the 70s and 80s, there was a big movement against, or in the 80s, sorry, there was a big movement against the barcodes. Because barcodes, it was believed by many in the kind of fringe evangelical movement, would be the mark of the beast. And then in the late 90s, you had the first RFID chip that was patented for a human, so that a human would have an implant, a number to buy and sell with. And of course, that raised the hackles of the apocalypticists, and it was said that would be the mark of the beast. And then it got rolled out, and nobody really wanted it, and nobody had the guts to force it. And so now you have Amazon Palm payment, right? Amazon One, and it's just simply a biometric system, but it's still a mark. It's a numeric mark. And at the moment, we can still use cash, we can still barter, we can use crypto. We don't have to be a part of that system. But I think that theme of a global system, a system that cannot be escaped, and a system in which you cannot participate unless you take the number, I think it's a perennial fear. It was as true under the Romans for Christians as it was for pagans and Gnostics under the Christians, as it has been for anyone who doesn't have the economic and political authority of self-determination under increasingly mechanistic and technocratic systems. Now, the mark of the beast is here. It's 666, it's 111. I don't know, what's your social security number? That's how I see it. I think it's a perennial archetype that is always just on the edge of realization, but I think that we're much, much closer to it than we were even 5 years ago.
Let me just comment on the mark of the beast thing, because there's my tradition, I think, can be shoehorned into what Joe is saying. But, the 666, that's the number of man. Man was created on the sixth day. And so when you see things in three, it means in their fullness. So man in his absolute fullness, devoid of seven, devoid of God. And so you have a mark on the hand and the head, and that represents the work of your hands and your thought life. And so it's like those things have been stamped by the beast system. Those things are devoid of the divine interaction. Those things are devoid of, they're separated from God. So we see a symbolic application that can apply at all times, and then and then we see real applications. Whether I preach a message that said the COVID shot is kind of a mark of the beast, because it's kind of a thing where I say I have to get it, I have to submit to this system specifically physically in my body in order to engage commerce, which is right, specifically was referenced in Revelation 13. So I think one of the cool things about Revelation is this really beautiful prophecy that applies morally. We can get a moral directive from it, and then also warnings that are actually practical.
Well, maybe we are. Maybe we are on the same page then.
I hope not.
We'll take a couple more questions. I don't know why this is not test one, two. Anyway, we'll take a couple more questions, but I do want to ask real quick while I have the floor. Joe and I were talking briefly, we talked about the Kardashev levels, which, if you're not familiar, are the levels in which a civilization will transcend into becoming a spacefaring civilization. Technically, we're in Kardashev 1 presently. And the utility of a religion is that it can bind together people over time and space so that you're kind of sticking to a mission of some kind over long time periods and long vast spaces. So I'm curious to ask what a spacefaring civilization could look like that might hang on to Christian tradition with AI, because this is something that's talked about by Elon Musk and a lot of other futurists and transhumanists. Could this be a seed of hope that religious traditions could have utility in the future? Because when you're traveling through space, if you don't know, you will have time will work differently. So if you communicate with different groups across space, there might be many generations overlapping before those messages get received. So a religious framework could have utility to keep people on the same page over vast time and space, which we see that does work in the world. People have migrated across the oceans. The example of the European seafaring peoples, colonizing the world, maintaining their framework through Christendom. That is actually very, very much utility has a lot of utility for perhaps a Kardashev 2, 3 level civilization. So, Joe, I want to pitch that to you, and then David, I'm sure you'll have a follow up as well.
I was at not that long ago, maybe 3 months ago, I was at a secret meeting of right-wing intellectuals, the kinds of people who take science very, very, very seriously in ways that are uncomfortable for a lot of people. But one of the things that came up that kind of bugs me out and made me uncomfortable was this guy who said that my anti-tech tirades, should they ever take hold, would mean that they could not build cathedrals on the moon and they would never have a basilica on Mars. Now, I think the Earth's pretty all right. We have a pretty good idea of what it's like on the moon. It's dry. It sucks. Living on Mars would basically be like being on lockdown at all times, except for when you go outside, your eyeballs explode. So I'm not enthusiastic about space. However, if that means getting rid of transhumanists, then maybe I'm more open. I add one more note to that. There is a very strong Christian desire to spread the gospel to dead planets where no souls exist. And I find it to be as respectable as I do ridiculous. But something that really sticks with me about the idea of space and going to Earth is these are not going to be in any way egalitarian systems. These are not going to be benefits that are spread around. And I think that was really well illustrated by Jeff Bezos' statements at the Washington Cathedral, I think in 2001, 2002. And he was talking about his vision of what space should be, the solar system should be. And it should be, because the Earth can only hold so many people, and he's very much a pro-natalist, we could have 1 trillion people spread across the solar system. I guess watching that internet porn and mining asteroids, I don't know what they're supposed to do out there. And then he had this idea that because the Earth is so fragile, that maybe people would just come back and visit it as if they were visiting a national park with their weird, frail bones that have developed with no gravity. Now, I think for me, as a Christ-loving pagan, I think that we should probably focus on making the Earth beautiful and finding our place here.
I disagree. No. I mostly agree. But I'm going to circle back to Carlton's question. You know, in Mormonism, they have this idea that they're trying to solve this question. I'm not a Mormon. They have some really weird ideas. They think Jesus and Satan are brothers. They just have some it's just bizarre. But they have this idea that they're going to get their own planet in heaven, and they're going to get to basically terraforming not just, you know, the ground, but the atmosphere itself, whatever, with God power of some sort. I kind of really like the idea, and this is the reason why. I also don't like the idea of living in a space bubble on the moon, but I like the idea of replication of life. And I think the idea of replication of life in the construct that God gave it to us, in the sense, seeing the Garden of Eden spread is a really beautiful idea. So I love that question that you asked, Ian. How would Christianity hold us together? Because there has to be an equivalent set of morality for us to decide upon, or else, like, you know, let's say they terraform Mars and it looks exactly like Earth. Let's just say they figure out, you know, gravity and they don't have rubber bones, and like, why don't they just come back and kill us? Well, obviously having this base of morality is really important. There's a Christian theological principle that's argued about, but it's called the first mention, or first principle, the principle of first mention. And it's like, those things are very important. And in the very beginning, in Genesis, the second chapter, God says to mankind, be fruitful and multiply. And so the multiplication of life, you see that replicated in the Abraham promise in Genesis chapter 12. God says, like, here's what I got for you, buddy. Like, you're going to have an incredible family, nation, you're going to have offspring like the stars of the sky. And I hope that population is not just checked by war and disease. I hope that insinuates the proper use of tools in order to see Earth multiply. Now, I think we have hundreds of years, probably thousands, before we're at that place. We start stacking farmland with, you know, glass sidewalls. There's tons of stuff to do before. We could probably go down before we go up, all of that kind of stuff. But I think the idea of multiplication and replication of life is a very good idea and a very Christian principle.
All right, one more question, or a couple more. We got you, sir.
Yeah, thanks.
This thing doesn't work, so just
Okay.
yell.
Yeah, no worries.
Two more questions.
Okay, great. Well, I thought it was very interesting that you invoked Mormonism. I'm not, terribly familiar with their theology. Specifically, you were saying about terraforming planets, but
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a Mormon, obviously, by that introduction. But what's very interesting about that is clearly theology does impact our relationship with technology, right? And so my question has to do with priesthoods, which you guys have spoken about multiple times. So, like Joe, you invoked crypto, so like, we know that the man who invented the term Cyborg Theocracy, he's very prominent for another concept, which is Bitcoin monasteries. That would be like sort of an Orthodox, or maybe we can say Catholic concept, right? The monastic tradition. You're also obviously, with Bannon, you guys have a huge platform, right? So maybe there's a question in terms of the political realm. What can we sort of prescribe to people in terms of how we relate as individuals, as Christians, to our technology? I'm curious as well from a Protestant perspective. Being Protestant myself, I'm just curious. I mean, it's much more of I would say, sort of self-directed religion in comparison to, like the Vatican, or obviously the state and churches and big orthodoxy. But the question is essentially, how do we think about priesthoods in context of managing this technology? Because currently it seems like we're sort of in a free-for-all. So,
Go first. Sure. I want to thank you for that very thoughtful question. What's your name?
Jeremy.
Thank you, Jeremy. I want to talk about just kind of the societal priesthood first, because when we talk about the Christian priesthood, the construct of a Christian priesthood, we're talking about a very specific role that has very specific duties, that's designed for a very specific end. Functionally, the priest's job is twofold. It's to communicate on God's behalf to man, on a man's behalf to God. And Protestantism kind of threw that upside down in a good way. But the priesthood, pragmatically, in a society, is that which holds the most mysterious power. And we can see that by this Catholic concept called the magisterium. And the magisterium was there was language used primarily in Latin that was hidden from the regular people, that this language base held the priesthood as a class. I'm not talking about the functional role as an atoning actor, but the class of those people in power as related to political power and or technology. So it's like whenever you see a ton of really bizarre language, that's evidence for magisterium. So like, like look at our drug culture, like look at the name of every bizarre drug, Lancerectium, John Pananaganon, or what, that's not a drug, I just made that up. There's all of this very weird, mysterious language to hide you from what's actually happening, and that's evidence of this priesthood class that has a power structure and wants to hold on to it and doesn't want to make it accessible to people. I'm a philosophy major. Philosophers they love to do that. Right now, our medical world and our technological world, we see them as the primary priestly class of our time that has the most functional magisterium, as in the sense of body of esoteric language that helps hold their power system in a society that then makes their moral decisions affirmed by all of what used to be like, smoke and like swinging the thing, you know what I mean? All of that stuff has now been replaced by, AI and ChatGPT, all this stuff Joe's an expert on. But we see that evidence by some of the language defensive walls to hold them in power. And so what do we need to do? We need to not be idiotic and not be tricked by magisterium, the language of the priestly class, and we need to be moral beings that use tools in a righteous way.
I've spoken with Jeremy, so I'm at the risk of repeating myself to some extent. I'm very much an individualist. I'm so Protestant that my critique was then turned against the Baptists and all other organized religions. So I don't really recommend it for most people. I don't think it's very good for your head. So I'm very much in support of the fiercely traditional and fiercely intolerant groups like the Orthodox Church, like trad Catholics, like Protestants who are just so rigid in their thinking that I can barely speak to them, but at the same time, it's obvious that they create healthy people. They create healthy communities by and large. They create healthy children. They produce lots of children. And so you mentioned the Orthodoxy in particular. That is something that I mean, maybe I would join one day, but I just couldn't see it. I still see that rigid intolerance as a real bulwark against everything that's coming at us. And I think that those are the communities. Orthodox Jews are very, very similar, very anti-tech. And a lot of Hindu and Buddhist groups, be they sanghas or temples, are also very wary of this, and so on and so forth. I think that religion, traditional organized religion, however conflicting they are with each other, and however much leave me out of it, but I think that is going to be a source of real power. And it's going to be some of the only places that in 100 years, what we call humanity now, that will be among the few places that it still exists, by and large, untainted. And so our friend Ardian Tola and his idea of Bitcoin monasteries, I've been talking to him about it for 2 years. I still don't know 100% what these Bitcoin monasteries are supposed to be, but I do know this, that Bitcoin represents, in its purest form, a decentralized form of currency and also a decentralized form of computing, so that even information encoded into Bitcoin or any kind of decentralized blockchain ledger is going to be, in some sense, inalterable without a broad consensus. So, for instance, my book is published on the blockchain at Canonic XYZ, meaning that there's a digital form of it that cannot be retroactively altered to turn it gay or to turn it, whatever, lame and pro-tech or whatever it is they would want to do to it. So I think that the idea of the Bitcoin monastery is very, very simple, that you have to recognize, and this is the words of our friend Ardian Tola, the founder of Canonic XYZ, a publication house. you have to recognize that Bitcoin and the entire system of machine worship, if you're a religious person, it is your enemy. And yet, if you are facing an enemy, you have to take up the weapons of your enemy. And just like a rifle is a weapon against a centralized federal government, and just like increasingly I think Eric Prince is absolutely correct, drones are going to be a very important element that must be decentralized, as up as they are. And crypto is very much the same. It is a weapon. It's a way of maintaining your wealth, or maintaining even lines of communication in the more esoteric forms that can withstand the pressure of the cyborg theocracy.
All right, thank you guys. I think that's enough. So if you want to ask any further questions, just ask in person. All right, don't forget we have marvelous books by these genius authors here, so come and buy a book. For those of you that got the free book, I'll figure that out in a minute. Everyone back to drinking. If you don't have a drink in your hand, get a drink, and be merry and make new friends.